Chapter 3. Second Declension. Chapter 3 covers the following: second declension nouns, mostly masculine and neuter, US versus ER nouns of the second declension, grammatical apposition, and Latin word order. At the end of the lesson, we'll review the vocabulary you should memorize in this chapter. Second declension masculine nouns. Where first declension includes mostly feminine nouns with A at the end of their base, second declension includes mostly masculine and neuter nouns with O at the end of their base. Thus, second declension has different forms from first declension, but the uses of the cases are the same. However, there's another important distinction between first and second declension. The O at the end of the base in second declension is weak, and it doesn't show up as O as often as the A shows up in first declension. The second declension O can appear as U, as in the nominative singular us, or the accusative singular or it can appear as I, as in the genitive singular and nominative plural e, and the dative and ablative plural is. Here are the endings for second declension masculine, beginning with the singular. The nominative singular is us, or in some cases spelled er. We'll discuss that in a second. The genitive singular is e, dative o, accusative ablative o, and one of the few instances of an irregular vocative, short e. In the plural, the endings are e, orum, is, os, is. The vocative is regular here in the plural. It's identical to the nominative e. Leaving the vocative out, let's recite those endings together. Us, e, o, o. E, orum, is, os, is. Let's say it again, a little faster. Us, e, o, o. E, orum, is, os, is. To form a second declension masculine noun, do the same thing you did in first declension. Take a noun that belongs to that declension, remove the long I genitive singular ending from the genitive singular form to get the base, and then add the endings on. Here's an example of that process with the word filius, meaning son. The base is fili, F-I-L-I. To that you add the endings. Filius, filii, filio, filium, filio. We'll talk about the vocative in a second. Filii, filiorum, filiis, filios, filiis. Please note that the genitive singular in some Roman authors can have only one I at the end, filii. But we'll follow the convention used by the majority of classical authors and put two I's at the end of the word, filii. Also note the vocative singular of this word. The Romans didn't like taking a base that ended with I and putting a short e after it. That would have produced filie, and that sounded disagreeable to the Romans. So they left the e off the vocative ending if there was an I at the end of the base. Thus the vocative of filius is filii. Though the majority of the endings in second declension have long vowels in them, none of the long marks over those vowels is mandatory because none of them distinguish two different grammatical forms. So that's one nice feature of second declension. Now let's address a minor peculiarity involving second declension. The Romans, for some reason, did not like to end second declension masculine nouns with rus, R-U-S. So if a base ended in R, like the base puer, which means boy, the Romans, instead of going puerus in the nominative singular, simply went puer. But you can see from the rest of the forms of this word, the real base is puer, because the word declines puer, pueri, puero, and so on. Here's another, simpler way to look at it. If a second declension masculine noun ends er in its nominative singular, you can't tell whether the e is retained in the base or not just by looking at that one form. You have to look at the genitive singular to see whether the base does what grammarians call contracts or not. The Latin word liber, meaning book, illustrates this principle well. By just looking at the nominative singular liber, it's impossible to tell if the base contracts or not. But by looking at the genitive singular, libri, which does not have an E, you can see that in fact this word does contract, and that the base of this word is libra, L-I-B-R. This is the base that will be used for all the non-nominative singular forms of this word, except for the vocative, but whoever talks two books? Thus, the genitive singular becomes very important with these words because it shows whether the base contracts or not. So, for instance, puer, pueri does not contract, but liber, libri does contract, as does ager, agri, the Roman word for field, from which we get words like agriculture. These ER second declension nouns demonstrate the importance of deriving the base of a Latin noun from its genitive singular, not its nominative singular, a principle that's true of nouns across all declensions in Latin, because too often the nominative singular is irregular. And that's why the genitive singular is listed in the vocabulary and dictionaries. It supplies the proper base. This is a very important principle, so it's worth reviewing what we said in the previous lesson. To get the base of any Latin noun, drop the ending from the second form in the vocabulary, the genitive singular. With that, you'll have the base to which to attach the proper endings. In first declension, a word like fortuna, fortunae, feminine, if you drop the AE genitive singular ending from the second form, you can see that the base is fortune. That's the base you use to create all the rest of the forms. With a word like ager, agri, masculine, which we just discussed, if you drop the genitive singular ending E, spelled with a long I, from the second form, you can see that the base is AGR. And that base, with no E in it, is the base used to create all the rest of the forms after the genitive singular. While it is tempting often to use the nominative singular to get the base of a noun, because the base does often exist there in its proper form, don't get into this habit. Too often the nominative singular is irregular. You will do yourself a great favor now by practicing using the genitive singular to get the base. This reflex will serve you well when dealing with other types of Latin nouns later. Second declension is one of the few categories of nouns in Latin where the vocative singular is different from the nominative singular. So, for instance, a second declension masculine name like Marcus has a vocative singular ending in short E, Marque. Likewise, the vocative of a word like tyrannus, meaning tyrant, is tyranne, or of amicus is amice. In all these instances, the noun is being directly addressed. But there are two instances when E is not used in second declension vocative singulars. First, if the nominative singular of the second declension noun ends in ius, the vocative singular has no ending. So, for instance, the name Vergilius, the Latin form of the name of the great Roman poet Virgil, has a vocative Vergilii, not Virgilie. Here, the E ending is dropped altogether. Second, if the nominative singular ends in ER, the vocative singular returns to its normal form in other declensions, where it's identical to the nominative singular. So, for instance, the vocative singular of the word puer is puer, not puere. Now let's explore an important grammatical principle, apposition. Just as an adjective can specify a noun, the red car, not the blue one, a noun can specify another noun. For example, there goes Caesar, the general. Or, an honest person tells the truth, the greatest weapon of righteousness. Or, here's my wife, my beloved darling. In each of these examples, the second noun clarifies the first noun. So, for instance, there goes Caesar, the first noun, the general. The general, the second noun, clarifies who Caesar is. In the second example, weapon clarifies truth. And in the third example, darling clarifies wife. When a later noun modifies an earlier one in this way, the second noun is said to be an appositive, or in apposition to the first noun. In English, an appositive must be close to the noun it clarifies, or it's impossible to know which noun is being referred to. So, for instance, if we say Caesar loved Cleopatra, the Roman general, grammatically that's incorrect because Cleopatra was not a Roman general. To correct this, so that the appositive is closer to what it's specifying, English speakers must say Caesar, the Roman general, loved Cleopatra. But in Latin, appositives and the nouns they modify do not have to be next to each other because Latin has something English doesn't. It has grammatical case endings that can show agreement. So a Latin appositive only has to be in the same case as the noun it's clarifying. It doesn't have to be next to it. Here's an example. Fama ira magna populum non servat, meaning rumor, which is really great anger, does not keep the people safe. In Latin, it's possible to rearrange the word order and not affect the meaning of this sentence. A Roman, for instance, could say, Fama populum non servat ira magna. Literally, rumor does not save the people, great anger. A word order that would make no sense in English. But even with the words in this order, Romans would know ira clarifies fama because ira and fama are in the same case, the nominative singular. And that raises an issue we've mentioned before, but it's worth reiterating. Latin does not use word order to convey grammar the way English does. So, for instance, in English, if you say, the money sees the boy, you've said something that makes no sense by the rules of English grammar. To phrase the thought properly, you must say, the boy sees the money, because in English, word order conveys grammatical function. But in Latin, that's not true. While word order can be important, it's not essential to the meaning of a sentence the way it is in English. So, for instance, you can say these words in the same order, puer vidit pecuniam, the boy sees the money, but in Latin you can also say pecuniam videt puer, the money sees the boy, and know that puer is the subject from its form and pecuniam the object because of its form, and therefore the sentence means the same thing, no matter the order of the words. It's not that word order doesn't matter at all in Latin. There is in fact a typical order words come in. Most often Latin sentences go subject, object, verb. For instance, puer pecuniam videt, a pattern that Latin passed on to a number of its daughter languages, the Romance languages, which is a helpful thing to know if you go on to study Spanish or Italian or French. All in all, what's important to remember here is that case, not word order, conveys grammatical function in Latin. Now let's look at the vocabulary for Chapter 3. The first word is amicus amici masculine, meaning friend, a second declension masculine noun. Note that 2 is the abbreviation for second declension, and M is the abbreviation for masculine. Remember, to get the base of any second declension noun, drop the I from the second dictionary form, the genitive singular. In this case, the base of amicus is amic. The next word is filius, filii, masculine, meaning son. It's also a second declension masculine noun. As we said before, I at the end of the genitive singular for this word is not a diphthong, but 2 syllables, separated by a Y sound, and it's pronounced filii. The next word, numerus, numeri, masculine, meaning number, is also second declension masculine. The abbreviation -I after the nominative singular indicates that the word is a regular second declension noun. This word numerous can also mean company, as in you are in the number of your friends, meaning in the company of your friends. The next word, populus, populi, masculine, means people, another second declension masculine noun. The base of this word is popul. The next word is yet another second declension masculine noun, puer, pueri, masculine, meaning boy, or in the plural, children. Latin has a tendency that if there is even one male in a group, the entire group is expressed in the masculine gender. That's why the plural of this word, pueri, can mean children, including boys and girls, because it is presumed there is at least one boy in this group. Puer is an ER noun, as we discussed above, and it does not contract. Thus its base is puer with an E. And finally, please note, this word means boy, not son. That's an easy mistake to make. The next word is sapientia, sapientiae, feminine, meaning wisdom. This is a first declension feminine noun. Be careful, not all the vocabulary here fits into the category of the new grammar we've learned in this chapter. The next word is weary, masculine, meaning man. That is, a male human being. It's a second declension masculine noun. And no, this is not where we get the word virus. The next word, pauki, paukai, meaning few or of few, is an adjective that exists only in the plural, because obviously few cannot be singular. That's why the vocabulary lists it with only its plural forms, e and I. The next word, Romanus, Romana, meaning Roman, is another adjective, but this one is regular and has both singular and plural forms. The next word is de, meaning from, down from, about, concerning. It's a preposition that takes the ablative case. It has both a physical meaning, down from, as in de Olympo, down from Olympus, and an abstract meaning, about or concerning, as in de sapientia, about wisdom. The next word, in, is also a preposition. It means in or on, and it takes the ablative case. For example, in patria, meaning in the fatherland. Later we'll learn that this preposition can also take the accusative case, and when it does, it changes the meaning of the word from in or on to into or onto. The next word, semper, meaning always, is an adverb. You're going to learn to love adverbs in Latin because they do not decline or conjugate, and thus they don't change form very often. So, semper is semper, semper. And by the way, to show what it goes with, it most often comes directly in front of the word that it modifies. The last word in this vocabulary list is a verb, habeo, habere, have, hold, possess, consider, a second conjugation verb. It has a physical sense, hold in one's hand, and a mental sense, hold in one's mind, that is, consider. Before concluding this lesson, let's practice with nouns and adjectives. Please decline and translate numerus magnus in all its cases and numbers, as we did in Chapter 2. Please pause this presentation, do this practice exercise on a sheet of paper, then return to the presentation to check your answers. Here is the declension of numerus magnus. And here's the translation of numerus magnus. That's it for Chapter 3. For the next class exercise, please print out a copy of the practice and review sentences for Chapter 3 on page 16 of Wheelock. Salvete discipuli.